Number 10. Hungry Queensland crocodiles. Queensland, Australia has got to be the worst place in the world for getting attacked by crocodiles. There is no better example of just how dangerous the Queensland waterways are than the recent story of Lee DePau, who narrowly escaped with his life after being mauled by hungry crocs. It began on Sunday morning. Lee, only 18 years old, was at the Johnston River with a girl he had been hanging out with the day before. The girl was only a visitor, a young backpacker checking out Australia. He thought he could impress her by leaping into the crocodile-infested waters. What he didn't anticipate was for the huge reptile to lunge out of the water and snap onto his arm. Before Lee even knew what was going on, his left arm had almost been ripped clean in half. Speaking with Channel 9's Today Show just a few days later, Lee explained that he had done it all because he was extremely attracted to the girl and he thought she'd be impressed. Well, she wasn't. In fact, she didn't even know he had been attacked. She thought he was joking as he screamed and thrashed around in the water. It wasn't until he managed to escape and climb ashore that she realized his arm was almost completely off. Luckily, Lee made it to the hospital in time to get fixed up and is expected to make a full recovery. Still, Queensland is definitely not the place to be jumping into random rivers. Number 9. Kenyan hyenas. Kenya is known for a lot of things: Mount Kilimanjaro, safaris, and deadly hyenas that occasionally eat people while they're asleep. Kenya is one of the most dangerous places when it comes to predatory hyenas, hunting and eating people. Just a few years ago, a pack of hyenas tracked down and killed 2 children and injured 6 of their family members in a brazen midnight attack. According to the Kenya Wildlife Service, one of the survivors had to be airlifted to the nearest major hospital in the capital of Nairobi. The attack came while the family slept in their traditional compound, known in the local language as Manyata. The hyenas broke into the house, stole the 2 smallest children, and bit the sleeping people just to show them who's boss. Then they ran away. Unfortunately for the local villagers, this was not the first time an incident like this occurred. Hyenas are known to be scavengers in the region, but they will also break into homes and attack the smallest people they can find, usually children. And since a typical hyena can weigh up to almost 200 pounds, they're considered more dangerous than a pack of wolves. Number 8. The photo shoot leopard. Definitely one of the most dangerous places to be attacked by an animal is on their home turf. And apparently, one of the most dangerous times to be attacked by a leopard is during a photo shoot. Seeing as leopards are extremely rare in the wild, people don't really get attacked by them in the bush. But at a recent photo shoot in Germany, at a retirement home for show animals, a model was left almost dead after being mauled by a leopard. The model's name is Jessica Leidoff, and she entered the leopard enclosure with the intention of taking some nice pictures. The leopard obviously didn't get the nice memo, though, because once the woman was inside the enclosure, it attacked her. It was such a brutal assault that the model was left with severe head injuries and had to be rushed to the specialty clinic. And here's where things got a little ironic. The model describes herself as an animal rights activist on her Instagram, saying she would love to be shot with any living animal as long as it didn't bring them unneeded stress. But as you can probably imagine, intruding into the leopard's home did indeed cause stress, so much that it tried to crush Jessica's skull with its teeth. Number 7. The Sundarbans. The most dangerous place in the world when it comes to tiger attacks is definitely India. It's an area called the Sundarbans, which stretches across Bangladesh. Tigers living in this jungle paradise killed roughly 22 people per year between 1947 and 1983. But before that, the brave people living in the region said tigers killed at least 50 or 60 people per year. This goes all the way back to ancient times, since tigers have ruled the area for thousands of years. When people began to move in, the tigers didn't really care for it. The powerful cats would destroy wooden boats, they would break into villages and eat children, and they would actively hunt the hunters and fishermen. Even today, the Sundarbans is a dangerous place to go. There are only 100 Bengal tigers left here, but it's still the largest single population of tigers living in one place anywhere on Earth. As for why the tigers here attack humans when the phenomenon doesn't really occur anywhere else, most experts say it's because of the seclusion. Tigers living in the Sundarbans never experienced widespread hunting by humans, so they never really had any fear of them. Instead, they came to see people as pests and sometimes dinner. Would you ever risk visiting a place famous for tiger attacks? Let us know in the comments below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 6. Arizona Bee Swarm. If you're interested in being swarmed by bees and stung to death, you might want to move to Arizona. It's become one of the most dangerous places in the world for people allergic to bees. Just recently, a man was killed and 2 people were sent to the hospital after the trio was stung hundreds of times each by a swarm of menacing bees near the town of Tucson. The local authorities said many were attacked. 3 of them were attacked so viciously that they needed immediate medical attention. Seeing as one of them died, the stinging was about as severe as it gets. In fact, 3 of the firefighters sent to investigate the situation were also stung multiple times and had to run away. One of the firefighters was stung at least 60 times and himself had to be taken to the hospital. Finally, the authorities tracked down the source of the angry bees. There was an open hive in a nearby tree, estimated at over 100 pounds. This was a huge hive, and unfortunately, it's not even that rare in Arizona. According to the Carl Hayden Bee Research Center in Tucson, the large majority of swarms in Arizona are Africanized honeybees. These are also known as killer bees, mainly because they kill people. Even though swarms are usually docile, when they do flare up and get violent, people almost always end up dead. Number 5. Nunavut Bears. If you ever wondered what it's like to be attacked by a polar bear, simply take a trip to the Canadian territory of Nunavut. This is the most dangerous place for polar bear attacks in the world. In 2021, 3 people were sent to the hospital after being ambushed by a single polar bear in the Baffin region of this remote place. According to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, all 3 of the individuals were seriously wounded but expected to make full recoveries. The officers were called to the small town of Sanarajak, where the incident occurred. 2 of the victims, both women, needed to be airlifted to the nearest hospital in Iqaluit, while the 3rd victim, a man, was in such bad condition that he had to be flown thousands of miles away to Ottawa. But this was hardly the first polar bear attack in the area. Experts say attacks are indeed rare, but fatal encounters are becoming increasingly more common. For example, in 2018, a man named Aaron Gibbons was killed by a polar bear while trying to protect his children from the rampaging beast. And that same summer, Daryl Connick, a local hunter, was murdered in cold blood by a polar bear while out on a hunting expedition. In conclusion, don't go to Nunavut unless you want to end up literally fighting a polar bear. Number 4. A deadly water well. In Indonesia, 2 people recently wound up dead at the bottom of a well because of a few snakes. 2 local residents of a small, rural village were trying to drain a well when the horrible incident occurred. The problem with the well was that it had been contaminated by rotting snake carcasses. For whatever reason, dozens of snakes had climbed into the well and died. The stench was disturbing the villagers, and with so many dead snakes, obviously the water wasn't the cleanest. So, the first villager entered the well using a rope to rappel to the bottom. He took with him a water pump, intending to slurp all the toxic water out of the well. Unfortunately, just minutes after he turned the water pump on, he began to have difficulty breathing. He became unresponsive and then went limp. The second villager, not quite realizing what was happening, then climbed into the well to save his neighbor. Unfortunately, he also ended up having breathing issues and passing out. The 2 men were found later, with the water pump still chugging away and spitting out toxic fumes. How did the 2 men die? It had nothing to do with the snake corpses or the contaminated well water. It was the water pump that released toxic fumes, which then became trapped inside the well. These guys literally suffocated to death. The point of the story is that if you go to Indonesia, look out for wells filled with snakes. You just might suffocate. Number 3. The Atlantic Ocean. Deborah Scalinkilly was 24 years old when she set out on a sailing trip from Maine to Florida. Unfortunately, she was sailing through the Atlantic Ocean, one of the most dangerous places in the world when it comes to marine predators. Her sailboat was swept up by a tropical storm and then flipped over, at which point Deborah was forced to watch as hungry Atlantic sharks ate her crew members one by one. According to her eyewitness account, it was her friend Meg who drew the sharks to them. She had slashed her leg when the yacht capsized, becoming a lure for the great whites in the area. The sharks smelled the blood and swarmed. The 5 surviving members of the crash managed to get onto a dislodged piece of the boat, using it as a raft. Over the next 5 days, 3 other crew members fell into the water and were ripped apart by sharks. Deborah could do nothing but hold on to the raft and watch in horror as her friends were eaten alive. After almost a week of misery, Deborah and the only other survivor, a guy named Brad, were rescued by a Russian cargo ship. They were glad to survive, but were sad for their friends who had been torn apart by the bloodthirsty apex predators. Number 2. The state of Texas. Texas is the most dangerous place in the United States of America when it comes to animal attacks. Texas has actually been named the state with the most deaths caused by animals every year. According to data from the CDC, looking at incidents between 1990 and 2019, Texas has approximately 520 reported deaths by animals. That's an average of 26 per year. And to make things even worse for Texas, the second deadliest state doesn't even come close. It's California, with only 299 deaths in the last 20 years. That's just around half of the fatalities from Texas. It's also in stark contrast to Delaware, Rhode Island, and North Dakota. All three haven't recorded a death from an animal in over 20 years. So, which animals are killing people in Texas? It's primarily brown bears, snakes, sharks, and alligators. Most of the attacks come from territorial brown bears, with sharks and snakes, first rattlesnakes, and then copperheads and cottonmouths, coming in a close second. Last in line are alligators, but don't forget the occasional cougar, as big cats also kill the occasional Texan. And number 1, Vancouver Coyotes. The Canadian city of Vancouver is currently one of the most dangerous places in the world, where you could get attacked by a pack of wild coyotes. Specifically, the danger comes in the famous Stanley Park, located in the heart of the city. The Ministry of Forests recently had to order a cull of dozens of coyotes lurking in the park after a series of incidents involving humans being viciously attacked and purposely targeted by these oversized dogs. But it wasn't just a few incidents, it was more like 3 dozen. This was hugely alarming for one main reason. Up until recently, coyote attacks were rare. According to the U.S. Humane Society, more people are killed each year by golf balls than by coyote attacks. So, when there were 3 dozen attacks in a single month, the government of Vancouver had no choice but to step in and start dealing with the coyotes. But even with the cull underway, the city officials have warned citizens to stay out of the park after the sun goes down, lest they feel like being torn limb from limb by hungry coyotes.
Nine. Leroy Lutcher. 86-year-old Leroy Lutcher was working in his garden back in 2011 when he dropped a pair of hand pruners on the ground. When he bent down to pick them up, he lost his balance and fell forward, plunging his face right into the pruners. The gardening tool entered Lutcher's eye socket and went down through his neck. He put his t-shirt to his head to stem the bleeding and walked into his house, where he found his girlfriend and asked her to dial 911. Thankfully, surgeons managed to remove the pruners and save the senior citizen's eye. Weeks later, Lutcher had healed considerably. His injury was slightly swollen and his eye had minor damage, but the damage was minimal compared to how much worse it could have been. Speaking with the Enid News and Eagle, Dr. Lynn Polonsky said that Lutcher was lucky. The pruners had miraculously missed any vital structures and doctors were able to put him back together. In Polonsky's words, much to the man's luck, the gardening tool had penetrated 6 inches into his head and were resting against his carotid artery. In other words, it was a very close call. If the pruners had lodged any further into Lutcher's head, who knows what could have happened. He might not have lived to tell the story. That he wasn't exactly sure what had just happened in the moments immediately following the accident. He reached his hands to his face and could tell that the pruners were lodged halfway into his head. Yikes! Once the shock wore off and reality sank in and he realized he was covered in blood, the senior citizen said he felt the worst pain of his entire life. Lutcher told the Associated Press that he didn't even know if his eyeball was still there, adding that the sensation was so excruciating, he wasn't afraid to die at that point. After going through all that, I suppose some slight double vision and swelling is a small price to pay in exchange for being mostly healed. 8. Disasters down under. Australia seems to experience its fair share of gardening disasters. In recent weeks, the press reported on a 49-year-old Melbourne man who fell from a ladder while operating a chainsaw. He was trimming tree branches when he lost his grip and lost control of the machine, resulting in multiple severe lacerations that ultimately proved deadly. Another gardener in Sydney found himself in the hospital fighting for his life after paramedics were called to the lower North Shore area. Nobody knows for sure what happened, but it's believed that the man, who is in his 50s, leaned on a fence that gave way and fell between a wall, a car, and a trailer. Emergency responders initially had trouble getting to the man. They reached him with the help of the police and treated him at the scene. Then they took him to the hospital, where he was reportedly in critical condition. At last update, the gardener was fighting for his life with head and chest injuries, and his future remains uncertain. New South Wales Ambulance Inspector David Lambert released a statement reminding the public that accidents can happen out of nowhere and in a split second, and to use utmost caution, especially when working at heights. 7. Steve Palmer. Early last year, a series of floods swept debris into 34-year-old Steve Palmer's yard in England. While clearing his garden, he nicked his middle finger, which didn't seem like a big deal at first, but the father of two awoke to find that it was red and pretty swollen. Still, he figured no big deal. It would heal, and he went to work. Soon enough, Palmer's injured finger ballooned in size. He could barely move it, and his arm started turning black. Something was obviously very wrong. At the emergency room, doctors initially diagnosed him with sepsis. They eventually realized that he had a rare flesh-eating bacteria called necroticizing fasciitis. The damage was bad enough for Palmer to require an operation. He was transferred to another hospital where surgeons removed the dead and infected tissue from his arm. Palmer was spared from having his arm amputated thanks to a plastic surgeon. Doctors predicted that his recovery would take about a year. He used the experience as a cautionary tale, posting photos of his blackened arm on social media and warning his friends to wear gloves while gardening. After learning that something so small can create such a big problem, I can't say it's bad advice. Have you ever had a tiny cut that turned into something worse? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. 6. Akbar, Salabiro, and Watiba. When 25-year-old Akbar Salabiro failed to return home from his job at a palm oil plantation in Indonesia one day in 2017, his concerned family called the police. A search party gathered and went out looking for the man. Later that day, someone found an extremely bloated, reticulated python in Salabiro's backyard, struggling to move. Residents cut the reptile open and found their missing friend, who had been suffocated and swallowed whole. The horrifying discovery was captured on camera, making Salabiro's death the first documented case of a reticulated python killing and eating an adult human. It soon came to light that residents had heard some panicked screams coming from the direction of Salabiro's yard on the night he had disappeared. Sadly, nobody responded to his pained pleas for help. In 2018, a 54-year-old Indonesian woman named Watiba met the same unfortunate fate as Salabiro. She went to tend to her garden outside her home on the island of Muna and was never seen alive again. After noticing her absence, relatives and friends found Watiba's sandals and other belongings outside. Soon enough, they encountered a bloated 23-foot-long python. They found Watiba's body inside the snake, which had constricted her to death and swallowed her whole. 5. Grace Patricia Hamnet. Sometimes it's not the act of gardening that leads to tragedy in the garden, as the next example on today's list shows. While video chatting with her friends from her home in Cheshire, England back in May, 11-year-old Grace Patricia Hamnet accidentally became entangled in a garden swing and was unable to free herself. Grace's mother went outside to tell her daughter to watch for a delivery from McDonald's when she discovered the girl unconscious. The devastated parents' screams alerted neighbors, who jumped the fence and tried to perform CPR on Grace, but with no success. In the meantime, someone called for help. An inquest later found that Grace had joked around with her friends about hanging herself from the garden swing. But the situation was anything but a laughing matter when just moments later she got stuck on the rope. But her friends weren't sure what happened. Suddenly, Grace's phone was pointed towards the sky, and she was no longer speaking. Worried for her safety, the other kids who were on the video call notified their parents, who also contacted the authorities. By the time emergency workers arrived, Grace was in cardiac arrest. They tried reviving her while they rushed her to the hospital, where doctors made every effort to save her. But Grace remained deeply unconscious. CT and MRI scans revealed that the preteen had suffered from a brain injury resulting from a loss of oxygen and blood supply. Surgeons concluded that there was nothing more they could do to try saving the girl. She died from her injuries 5 days after arriving at the hospital. 4. Shawn Hudson. As this next item on today's list proves, even the professionals aren't immune to gardening-related accidents. In July of this year, an arborist with the City of Cleveland's Department of Urban Forestry, named Shawn Hudson, died on the job. At first, not much information was available on the tragedy, aside from the fact that it happened in the Romanian section of the Cleveland Cultural Gardens, and that Hudson died at the scene. City employees remained silent when questioned by the local news, but reporters noticed that there was a large fallen tree cordoned off by some yellow emergency tape, begging the question of whether Hudson was crushed by the trunk. It was later revealed that the tree had, in fact, fallen on top of the 48-year-old employee of 4 years. He was trimming branches when his life was unexpectedly cut short by the teetering timber. 3. John Clabbern. In what the press described as a freak gardening accident, tragedy struck the family of 52-year-old John Clabbern earlier this year when he fell to his death while trimming some bushes. The assistant director, who's well known for his work on the shows Underbelly, Survivor, Home and Away, and more, didn't die just from the fall alone. He was pruning the hedges outside his family's home in Sydney when he lost his footing and took the 10-foot plunge. Upon landing, he cut his hand on a cordless saw and immediately began losing a large amount of blood. The laceration was huge, and by the time paramedics found Clabbern, he was in cardiac arrest. It was unfortunately too late to save him. Clabbern's wife of 27 years, Melissa, was understandably devastated by the bizarre tragedy. She had expected her husband to pull through. Speaking with the press, she said that the accident had happened so quickly and described the ordeal as so surreal. Melissa had first realized that something was very wrong when she heard a branch break outside. At the time, she was in the family's kitchen. When she approached Clabbern, he simply said, "Call an ambulance now." He was surprisingly calm, despite undoubtedly being in a great deal of pain, perhaps because he knew how much his wife despised the sight of blood. Melissa found Clabbern in the yard, crawling around on his stomach and clutching his midsection. She told the Daily Telegraph that she kept retrieving towels to try stopping the bleeding, but the blood kept flowing. The grief-stricken wife further explained that just minutes before the accident, she and her husband had admired what a great job he was doing and how straight the hedges looked. Neither of them had any idea that he would soon be dead. In hindsight, there was nothing the paramedic could have done differently to save Mr. Clabbern's life. The authorities praised them for doing everything in their power to prevent him from dying. 2. Carla Campbell. So far today, we've talked about gardening accidents that prove to be nearly fatal and some that have even killed people. But one woman named Carla Campbell credited a garden accident with saving her life. Late last year, Campbell was working in her garden in Watiba, Kansas, when she lost her footing and fell. She received treatment for a broken tailbone, but much to her surprise, the pain didn't end there. When Carla found herself still hurting, she visited a pain clinic in search of relief and answers. The nurse who took her vitals noticed that the woman's pulse was abnormal and alerted the doctor, who had Campbell wear a special vest. The vest detected an aneurysm and indicated that she needed medical attention immediately. Speaking with local station WIBW, Carla said, "My cardiologist called and said go to the hospital. Do not pass go. Do not take your meds. Just go and they'll know what to do with you." Luckily for her, that's exactly what happened. Carla spent 15 days at the hospital preparing for surgery. Doctors made sure that they could safely operate by getting her blood pressure down. They put a pacemaker in her and sent her to a rehab facility, while she focused on making small steps towards her goals. She told interviewers that she ultimately hoped to get back home so that she could spend time with her grandkids. Carla also used her experience as an opportunity to warn others to pay attention to signs they might otherwise overlook that could indicate an underlying health problem. After all, it's better to be safe than sorry, right? 1. Brian May. Brian May is famous as the guitarist from the legendary music group Queen. But the 72-year-old also recently made headlines for some gardening accidents that led some to wonder if he should just give up the hobby altogether. In mid-2020, he posted on Twitter about how he had gotten in a near-fatal gardening accident that had landed him in the hospital. He didn't explain exactly what happened, but he made it clear that the damage was pretty gruesome. In May's words, he ripped his buttocks to shreds after being over-enthusiastic in his garden, leaving us to wonder how he ended up in such a precarious state. A few weeks later, the injured musician revealed that things had gotten even worse. In a social media post, he explained that he'd had a small heart attack and experienced a series of other health issues after tearing his butt up in his garden. A week after being released from the hospital for the gardening incident, May found himself in sheer agony still. The pain was so bad he reportedly wanted to jump at certain points. He returned to the hospital where doctors recommended open-heart surgery, but he opted to instead have 3 stents placed in his heart to treat artery blockages. While there, May also learned that the pain he was experiencing wasn't caused only by his ruptured rear end, but also by a compressed nerve in his back. He wrote on Instagram that years of carrying around a heavy guitar seemed to have finally caught up with him. Hopefully, that's the last of his injuries for a while.
Number 10. Angry shark. Where do you think the most common place for sharks to attack in the world is? It's actually New Smyrna Beach in Florida, but a very close second is Australia. But are you really surprised by this? A total of 642 shark attacks have killed more than 155 people in the Down Under since the year 1580. So in Australia, one of the very unlucky tourists met his ultimate fate at the hands, or should I say teeth, of one very angry shark. It happened at a popular spot known as Cable Beach in the northwest coast, a place famous for visiting tourists. Police were called early in the morning after a man was pulled out of the water with grave injuries. He was bleeding all over the sand, but before anyone could even ask the bleeding tourist what had happened, he sputtered and died. Medical attention was given at the scene, but he just couldn't get over the devastating injuries delivered by that powerful shark. It basically tore him apart. And even though the authorities claim shark attacks are rare, this tourist's death was the 8th fatal shark attack in Australia just that year. During the same time, there were 22 shark maulings that didn't prove fatal. In any case, this guy went to Australia to enjoy their beautiful beaches and big waves, and he left in a body bag. Number 9. Bungee jumping horror. A British woman went to Spain for a fun vacation. She was an adventurous, spirited 23-year-old girl, wanting to enjoy all the country had to offer. She was traveling with her aunt, and they were both adrenaline junkies and looking to have some fun, while her aunt was in for quite an unforgettable trip. They decided it would be more memorable to go bungee jumping. Neither of them had ever done it before, but it was on both of their bucket lists. Tragically, the aunt ended up watching helplessly as her niece died during a tragic bungee jumping accident. It happened at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. According to the New York Daily News, Cleo Diabro jumped from a stone bridge attached to a bungee cord and then smashed her head off that same bridge as she went down. Her aunt screamed in horror and looked over the railing in fear as her niece dangled dead at the end of the cord. It was a gruesome sight. But how did such a terrifying thing even happen? The authorities say there must have been a miscalculation with the rope that caused her to hit her head off the bridge so hard that she died. Unfortunately for her aunt, the memory will haunt her for the rest of her life. Number 8. The Miami Collapse. Near the end of June in 2021, an apartment building in Miami collapsed without warning. At the time, a family of 4 happened to be renting out a vacation condo, and they were inside that condo when the condominium collapsed. And according to the family, it was a miracle they didn't all die. As of right this very second, 4 people have been confirmed dead, and there are still 159 missing. The tragedy came when the Champlain Towers collapsed out of nowhere at 1:30 a.m. The family on vacation watched in terror as the condominium split in half right before their very eyes. They watched the condominium building crumble, though the room they were renting was left standing. They survived and didn't suffer any injuries, though they are undoubtedly traumatized for life. The family was so close to dying that they could literally stand at the edge of the open apartment where the rest of the building had collapsed, and they could look down at the heap of rubble in disbelief. Number 7. Angry Crocodile. Just recently in 2021, identical twin sisters from the UK ran into some trouble while backpacking around Mexico. Sisters Georgia and Melissa Laurie were in the port town of Puerto Escondido in the state of Oaxaca. One night they decided it would be a fun idea to go swimming in a local lagoon. Unbeknownst to the tourists, the lagoon was filled with hungry crocodiles. Melissa was the victim of a savage crocodile attack. It came at her from nowhere, and neither of the girls had seen the beast coming. But luckily, Georgia came to her sister's defense. She claims that it was because of her water rescue training that she was able to remain calm and fight the crocodile off her sister as it tried ripping her to pieces. Georgia repeatedly punched the crocodile, forcing it to let her sister go. And even when it came back to attack again, Georgia punched it straight in the face in a classic Chuck Norris move. The crocodile then gave up and ran away. Melissa was taken to the hospital in very delicate condition. She had suffered a wrist fracture, lacerations of an organ, internal bleeding, and flooded lungs. She was put into a medically induced coma while doctors struggled to drain the excess fluid in her body and help her to breathe without being on a machine. Hopefully, Melissa makes a full recovery. Would you be brave enough to take on a hungry crocodile to save your sibling? Let us know in the comments section down below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Vanished into thin air. Sarm Heslop has been missing as of the time this video was made for about 4 months. She was last seen on March 7th with her American boyfriend at a bar in the US Virgin Islands. Sarm went to the islands for a fun vacation, traveling all the way from the UK. Nobody knows where she went, what's become of her, or if she'll ever be seen again. Her friends don't believe she would just run away or have gone into hiding, but there's been absolutely no news or breaks in this case. So here's what we do know. Sarm is described as an athletic Caucasian woman standing 5 feet 8 inches tall, with long brown hair and a tattoo on her shoulder of a seahorse, flower, and a butterfly. She left the bar with her boyfriend at 10 o'clock in the evening. At 2:30 a.m., her boyfriend called the police and reported her as missing. He claimed that she never made it back to his catamaran, and yet she left the bar with him. This has put the boyfriend in a seriously hot spot, especially because he waited another 10 hours before reaching out to the US Coast Guard to report that she may have fallen into the water. He hasn't officially been named as a suspect, but he immediately hired a powerful lawyer, and he wouldn't let the police near his boat to search it. It looks like Sarm met the wrong rich guy, and sometime between 10 and 2:30 he disposed of her body. Number 5. Burned in Mexico. Dean Lucas and Adam Coleman were 2 Australian surfers driving from Canada through the United States and into Mexico on an unforgettable trip of a lifetime. They had a classic van and were driving across North America, hitting some big waves. Everything was going just great until they drove across the border into Mexico. The tourists then went missing and their van was discovered burnt to a crisp. Before their van was set on fire, the duo had been hanging out on the Baja California peninsula. They took the ferry into the state of Sinaloa on their way to Guadalajara. But before they could ever reach the city, they were intercepted by a gang of criminals, who then shot Adam Coleman in the face, butchered Dean Lucas, stole their vehicle, and ditched it somewhere and set it on fire. Thousands of dollars were raised online to help the surfers' families travel to the country to recover their bodies. Sinaloa is home to the powerful Sinaloa drug cartel, led by fugitive drug kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. While tens of thousands of Mexicans have been killed and over 26,000 have gone missing in the last 10 years of drug violence, violent attacks on foreign tourists are less common. 3 suspects have been arrested in connection to this crime. They were discovered with fake police uniforms that they had been wearing to commit highway robberies, especially on foreign tourists. After the bodies were discovered, they were handed over to the Australian consulate and were due to be sent back to their home country. Number 4. Attack of the Anteater. On a Disney cruise vacation, a young boy was attacked by an anteater. Yes, you heard that right. The boy and his mother were on vacation aboard the Disney Wonder when the vessel stopped in Colombia. Obviously, the child's mother had no idea what to expect in this beautiful coastal city, and when she took her kid to the National Aviary, she let the boy get a little too close to an anteater, which she claimed was not properly sequestered from visitors. Sequestered or not, you probably just shouldn't let your kid run up to a wild animal. Animals are extremely unpredictable. The anteater lashed out with its huge claws and mauled the child, though the injuries were not too severe. Then back on board the Disney cruise, the mother was hysterical. After the incident, she went full Karen mode and claimed that the cruise ship didn't give her son the proper medical care that he deserved, and has since filed a big lawsuit. Documents show the kid did actually receive medical care once he got back on board the ship, but it was not enough to keep him from contracting a severe mycobacterial infection from the animal. Attorneys claim the boy wasn't properly diagnosed or treated on board the cruise and didn't receive the care he needed. The result of the lawsuit was never revealed. They probably settled it real quietly. And the fate of the anteater is still unknown, though it probably is still attacking children who get too close to its habitat. Number 3. Brutality in the Dominican Republic. A woman from the US had a pretty miserable vacation in the Dominican Republic after she was brutally strangled and beaten, dragged down concrete stairs, and then beaten some more. According to NBC News, Tammy Lawrence Daly from Delaware was staying at the majestic Elegance Punta Cana when one of the nights there, she was jumped from behind. She had been on her way to the beach when an unknown attacker grabbed her from the rear and dragged her into a maintenance room, where he then assaulted her for 8 straight hours. It was absolutely brutal. Inside the storage closet, Tammy was strangled multiple times until she fell unconscious. She was kicked in the head and beaten with a club. In the end, her unknown attacker left her bruised and swollen for staff at the hotel to find the next morning. As tragic and horrifying as this was, nobody was ever even captured for the crime. And to make things even worse for visitors, it was reported that 10 tourists died visiting the Dominican Republic that same year, while others, especially women, have reported being brutally beaten and assaulted in the country. So yeah, ladies, watch out if you go to the Dominican Republic. Stay safe. Number 2. The worst return. This story didn't happen on vacation, but it did happen right after one. A man from Corpus Christi, Texas, arrived home from vacation to find something gruesome waiting for him. His name has not been given out of privacy concerns, but according to the local police, he arrived home to his apartment building to find an unknown dead woman lying in his bed. The guy had been gone on holiday for several weeks. He didn't recognize the dead woman, and he didn't know how she could have gotten into his house in the first place. He immediately ran out of the apartment and called 911. Officers arrived to investigate, but have been pretty hush-hush about what exactly happened. It looks like a squatter may have moved into the Texas man's house while he was on vacation and committed a bit of casual murder, leaving the evidence behind on his bed. Number 1. Before they arrived. In Otsego County, Michigan, 2 sisters were killed on their way to the airport for a family vacation. This is extremely tragic for a number of reasons, not the least of which being that they never even made it to the vacation. Their lives ended in tragedy on Interstate 75 when they were killed in a brutal car accident. According to state police, the accident occurred at just after 2:30 in the afternoon. A 21-year-old woman was driving a Mercury Montego in the southbound lane and swerved to avoid a collision, but she crossed the median, flew into northbound traffic, and was struck by a Toyota Prius. Inside the Toyota were the 2 sisters, aged 22 and 19. They were simply heading north for a little family getaway, and unfortunately for them and their family, they were pronounced dead at the scene. And here's where things get even more tragic. Their father was driving in the car behind them. They were all headed out on vacation together, taking separate vehicles to the airport. He watched helplessly as the car his daughters were in got ripped to shreds, and he could do nothing as rescue workers pulled their mangled corpses out of the ruined vehicle. Thanks for watching. What's your biggest vacation horror story? Don't be shy and tell us about it in the comments below. And then don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed